right, guys, welcome aboard. It's time for the December 20 edition of the Mac Forum Sunday video chat. I'm your host, Sly Dude. Welcome aboard for this evening. Probably will be a kind of short show, just a few tidbits that I managed to squeeze in during the week, researching, etc. Apologies for last week. We were having some weather-related issues, and net was being a little kinky, so didn't get that one in. Hopefully, you didn't miss too much. On tonight's thing, we have the usual forum roundup. We have a couple of tips and tricks, and a little bit of Mac and iOS-related information for you. Certainly, this is by no means everything that's out this week. As I say, things got a little hectic, so we didn't have as much time to scour the internet as usual. But let's get right into what we do have. First of all, we now have a total of approximately 292,080 threads. We're over 1,600,000 members, and our newest member is ATR Driver, as of about a half hour ago. So welcome to them and to all of our new members. For those of you that are still lurking around the forum and haven't become a member yet, I encourage you to do so. That's a great way to join a forum community. If you have a question, you can search the forum and read without being a member. But to ask a question, you really need to be able to become a member, rather. We don't really have another mechanism for you to ask questions other than by becoming a member. The contact, I noticed that some people are posting questions in the Contact Us forum. I don't recommend that because that forum is to moderate forum-related issues and is only seen by our moderation team. And that means that your question may not be seen by someone who could answer it. Even if you're new to Macs, it's entirely possible that you will be able to answer someone else's question, because sometimes we get questions from people who are switching from Windows to Mac. They want to know how to do something, or we get the occasional question from someone who is predominantly a Mac user, has to move something over to Windows and wants to know the best way to do it. So feel free to become a member, join right in, and start contributing to the conversation. I also want to mention to you, if you go to the main page, macforums.com, then you will see that there's also an area on there where you can subscribe to the forum newsletter. That is an excellent way to keep up with what's going on in the forum and to be able to know which threads are the most active during the week. You're not going to get bombarded with information. Basically, it's going to come out about once a week, and it's going to highlight a few of the threads in the forum. Typically, those will be the threads that have had the most activity during the week. So they may or may not be the thread that have your question to them. So I encourage you to visit the forum regularly. Let's look at some of the things that we have coming up this week. There is a thread starting in the forum about some tips for preparing to get rid of a used Mac that you may have and recycling that Mac. That's a start at what I said I was going to discuss. That will be coming up probably in the next show. I want to talk a little bit about what to do with a Mac once it no longer suits your needs. Maybe Santa's is going to be good to you and he's brought you a new Mac. Maybe you're going to pass that current machine uh, on to a relative or some charitable organization. We'll look at some ways to do that and how some things that you might need to do to prepare, be it Mac, on an iPhone. There are some things that you would need to do to prepare for that and make sure that your personal data is removed from the device before you pass it on. And that's true whether you're passing it on to a relative or some type of charitable organization. And I'll have some other thoughts to consider along the way. And so keep an eye. I'm sure there'll be some new ideas posted in that thread. And I'll have some thoughts coming up next week with a little more detail about that. Also, if you are one of the folks who have smart TVs that allow you to put content on a thumb drive and then play that content back on your smart TV, I'm sure you know by now that many of those TVs require the drive to be formatted FAT32. When you are formatting a drive for FAT32, you go down into disk utility and format a thumb drive or even a hard drive, because I think there are a few that will let you attach a hard drive. If your TV requires FAT32 formatting, a couple things to keep in mind. First of all, I'm sure you already know by now that no single file can be more than 4 GB on FAT32. The other thing that you may not know, and I did not know this, is that if the drive, even if it's formatted FAT32, will not work in these types of TVs in most cases if the drive has also been, if the option to do a GUID partition table has been added. So if you formatted on the Mac and you accidentally clicked to set up a GUID table, partition table, go back and reformat that drive and make sure that that option is removed, is unchecked. Also, as usual, make sure before you reformat that drive that any useful data that you might want has been removed, because formatting is going to wipe it out. A couple of other things just to keep you up to speed. We had a member, my apologies for not remembering the username. I'll have it in the thread. I'll have a link to the thread, as I do each week, about asking a question about preview and some markup tools that they thought were not available under Yosemite. In preview, the markup tools for things like making a selection and other text changes, other things like that. If you want to show those, what you're going to need to do is to open a document in preview. If the markup toolbar is present, you'll know it because of the tools that are there, such as the marquee selection, that rectangular selection tool may be there. Some other font and color change tools are there. If that toolbar is not present and you need one of those tools, those markup tools, here's how to do it. Once you've got a document open in preview, okay, if the tools are not present, that toolbar, that markup toolbar is not present, press Shift Command A simultaneously. And that should bring the markup toolbar up and make it active. You can also get to this from the View menu. If you go to Preview's View menu, you will see an option that says Show Markup Toolbar. If the toolbar is already showing, it will say hide markup toolbar. So that those are the options that you're looking for. Uh, that's a way to get at the tools for things like font changes, color, etc. Uh, and there's a lot of capability there. And I do want to be sure that I point out to you as well, uh, preview, now that I mentioned preview, I want to go back and talk a little bit about something that I mentioned briefly a couple weeks ago. And that is, the preview is another example of the need, or the benefit rather, of poking around in the Apple applications that are included on your Mac and find out all of their capabilities before you purchase third-party software. Not that I have anything against third-party software, and it's not that I am exclusively an Apple software user. I have a number of pieces of third-party software that I use regularly. But one of the things that I've noticed over the last few years is that as I've experimented with some of these Apple applications, I've found capabilities in them that I did not know were there, or that I hadn't really, in some cases, I knew the capabilities were there, but had not fully explored. Last week, not last week, excuse me, I think it was a couple weeks ago now, I mentioned to you that the QuickTime Player app that's now included in most of the recent incarnations of OS X has some editing capability, and it was able to edit some files that I could not edit in MPEG Streamclip. There were some issues with the time code, and when you would go to MPEG Streamclip to try to make an edit, it would look to you like the edit had been made. In some cases, it hadn't been made. In some cases, it had been made, but then the error occurred when you tried to save the file. And then Streamclip would tell you that it couldn't make a movie file, or the message would flash by so quickly that you didn't see it. And there's no way that it would save a clip, a fairly substantial clip, in a matter of the second or two that the dialog box stayed. So I started noticing that a couple of files that I had worked on had 0K file sizes, 40K file sizes, and things like this. And I tried a couple of different changes, couldn't get them to edit still. Didn't really want to feed the movies into iMovie. I haven't spent enough time with the current incarnation of iMovie, so it still feels a little awkward to me. And this is just basically chop editing that I'm doing, cutting some film and removing unnecessary information, cutting the film down to reasonable limits. And iMovie seems to be overkill for that. I wasn't adding any special effects or anything like that. So one night I remembered that QuickTime Pro had some editing capabilities, and I went into that and took a look at it, started experimenting with it, and lo and behold, I was able to save the file, export the file out 1080p in most cases. I had one or two that I could not export at 1080p, but there were most of them it's worked. So that's something to keep in mind. That's an example. The preview thing that I mentioned a while back with color changes and color corrections in preview. Once again, that's something that you would know really only by experimentation. The capabilities that are there, they're not on par with, say, Photoshop or some of the other third-party software that's out there for photo editing, but For some cleanup work, it actually works pretty well. So do check out those Apple applications, find out what they're capable of. Um, do some quick searching online, and you'll find some uses for them that you might not have anticipated. All right, something else to come out of this week. Um, as usual, Google has a video out now that's basically the year in search. They've done this every year for the last several years, and it gives you some idea of some of the things that were most commonly searched for this year throughout the year of 2015. I have a link in the show notes to that. And once again, Apple had three of the most frequently searched for tech terms. The first one was information on the latest iPhone models. So last year it was the iPhone 6. This year it was searches for information on the 6S. That was the top search. The Apple Watch moved up to number 3 in their list of tech-related stuff, and the iPad Pro took 4th place. And so you can see in the tech sector how these Apple products were really all over Google as far as search requests are concerned. I saw something recently, I think I have it linked to on my Google Plus page, suggesting that the iPad Pro has the potential to be a game changer in the enterprise market. And I will be, I want to look over that information, that data a little bit more before I comment on it, but you can expect to hear something from me about that soon. And that's something that you'll want to keep an eye out. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting you go out and buy one just because they're a big deal in the enterprise sector. But over the years, there have been numerous suggestions that, oh, this Apple product is going to be big in enterprise. It's going to finally be Apple's inroad into the enterprise market. And each time there's been something new come out, someone has said, oh, this is going to be the thing that's going to get Apple in the enterprise market. So I'm not quite biting on that yet. I want to see the logic behind it, but I'll keep you posted on that as well. Check the forum and check the show weekly. I should have some thoughts on that maybe as early as next week. We'll see. All right. And also, one other thing to get to before we wrap up tonight, I had originally thought perhaps the show would run to an hour, but looks like we're going to come in somewhere around half an hour. But before I leave, I do want to mention to you Macworld contributors Rob Griffiths and Kirk the iTunes guy, aka Kirk McLaren, have an article this week that I found kind of interesting. It didn't discuss anything that I didn't already know, but it just kind of consolidated it into one article. Both of these gentlemen, by virtue of their professions and other tasks that they're involved in, run multiple applications simultaneously on their Macs. But they do it in two somewhat different ways. One of them uses dual monitor setup and has windows on both monitors. Some things are on one monitor, some are on the second. And then that's Rob Griffin's approach. Kurt, the iTunes guy, has a single monitor setup, but he makes use of the Spaces functionality built into OS X. And I have to say, when Spaces first came out, I used it a little bit because I did not have a second monitor. I then started using a second monitor because I had one laying around the house, and I decided to start using the second monitor. OS 10 handles dual monitor situations pretty well. And I've always, when I got spaces, if I got too many spaces open, I always seemed to have a hard time remembering what application was in what space. So I generally do something similar to what Kirk does, and that is I put certain applications on one monitor, certain applications on another one. On my main monitor at any given point in time will be whatever application I'm working in. If I'm working in Microsoft Word, for example, that will be on my main monitor. If I'm web surfing in Safari or something like that, that's going to be on the main monitor. What tends to get relegated to the second monitor is things that don't need my attention or need it very sporadically. For example, email. I don't need to look at every email that comes in immediately as it occurs. So I've got an email window up on my second monitor. Right now, I've got my show notes up on the second monitor, while normally, if my video camera was active, I'd have the video feed up in the main screen just to check on things and make sure everything is working okay. But you get the idea. My approach to this situation of multiple applications is to take things like Photoshop tool palettes and the notification window for dictate and move those to the second monitor, while my primary application, my main things are on the main monitor. I'm having to adjust that a little bit with the new iMac. The resolution on that monitor is such that there are some things that I just find a little awkward to read. So I'm still experimenting with, do I want to put those things on the second monitor, which is a lower resolution, or do I want to take the iMac monitor out of standard mode, which is a high resolution setting, and adjust the resolution on the iMac a little bit. I'm still experimenting with that to see which one I prefer. Kirk and Rob, both very knowledgeable people, have been around the Mac for quite some time. Each present their reasoning for why they do things the way they do. And the general consensus by the end of the article seems to be, do what works for you. I'll have a link to that article because within it is a link to another article which discusses to some extent how OS 10 handles multiple monitor situations. So I'll have that for you. It should be, the notes should go up probably sometime later this evening. If not, they'll certainly be up by this time tomorrow. And that's going to just about do it for this week. Didn't include very much in the way of iOS tips. Hopefully, I'm going to spend some time this break looking at some new stuff, experimenting with a couple of applications I haven't used in a while. Have some ideas for you. Also thinking through some things to maybe change with the show after the new year. So we'll keep in touch about that. And until next Sunday, I am your host, Sylvester Rock. You know me as Sly Dude in the forum. I will be seeing you in the forum during the week. Hopefully, I'll be able to answer the questions that you have, or you never know, I might be asking you a question. I seem to have a knack for answering questions that don't get answered, but that's okay. And until next week, the Christmas holiday comes up before our next show, so I want to wish all of our forum members Merry Christmas. If you're celebrating Christmas, if you're not, and you're celebrating a different holiday, you know, Hanukkah, you've got so many holidays this time of year. When you celebrate, enjoy the holiday, be good to others, And if you happen to be partaking of adult beverages, let somebody else do the driving. We sure want you back next week. Until next week, I am your host, Sylvester Rock, aka Sly Dude on the Forum, and you've been listening to the Mac Forum Sunday Chat. Good evening, everyone.